Hello everybody, and welcome to Some Patches Required, a show where we hope to educate and entertain you on the ever-turbulent games industry. My name is Zach, and I'm one of your hosts.
And I am your other host, Aaron.
And before we get into the topic today, I just wanted to take some time to thank all of the returning as well as new listeners that are coming to the show. Hello, we appreciate and love all of you, and if you wouldn't mind too much liking and subscribing or following, sharing the show with a friend, we would greatly appreciate it. Or a mortal enemy, we like to say that as well. So if there's someone that you just really hate and you want them to have a good podcast to listen to, please, feel free, gosh, I can't talk today, to share this with your enemies and those you hate.
Yes, indeed. We're all about offering olive branches through the form of specifically our show.
Yeah, I wouldn't like to say that our show has ended conflicts before, mostly because I don't have the evidence to prove that at all. But I also don't have the evidence to prove that hasn't happened. So
this is true.
You don't know. It's really more of a gamble.
All that peace that you see in the world around you today, that could be us.
It could be. It could be. We don't have the data to say either way. But today, Aaron, we have a more evergreen subject, which is game marketing budgets, and specifically talking about a game that I've actually never personally played. But for the sake of this conversation, I don't think I need to. Monopoly Go, which of course is one of the biggest mobile games on the market today. Aaron, as far as I know, I don't think you've played it, but now would be your time to tell me that I'm wrong in a big doo-doo face for lying.
No, you're actually right. But the reason that I have not played Monopoly Go is actually due in part to the game's marketing. It's actually predominantly due to the game's marketing, because I candidly love Monopoly as a game. It's one of my favorite board games to play with my family. Even though it takes a billion years, it's really actually just fun to have that little, bubble where you can get mad and have fun and take big risks and nothing really matters. I used to play Monopoly against AI on my Switch all the time just to unwind in the evening. So I love Monopoly, but when the marketing all came out for Monopoly Go, I found it so horrifically off-putting that I swore I would never play the game. So yeah, thank you, this marketing budget, for having the exact opposite of your intended effect, at least on one potential user.
Well, I guess to just straight up ask the question, I mean, so for those that don't know, part of the reason we're talking about it is because Monopoly Go came out as having spent $500 million on their marketing budget for this game. And that doesn't even include the development budget. But to get to my point, do their ads reflect that they spent $500 million on their marketing budget, Aaron?
No.
Is that something that's obvious to you?
It is wildly not. But before I go off on what could be a 45-minute tirade just on the ads that I've gotten for this game, I will say that a lot of the time when we talk about budgets and anything to do with astronomically large amounts of money, it becomes kind of easy to lose it in the math soup, just how significant $500 million is as a budget for anything. And that's why a good couple of months back, this game started making, pretty big headlines amongst the I suppose possibly fairly niche subset of the community that actually cares about that sort of thing. Hopefully you're part of that, dear listener, because we're going to be talking about it. But yeah, the actual quality of the marketing that they did, I wildly do not think reflects that budget. I think maybe they were going for volume more than quality, but that maybe just be, my particular tastes.
Or it could be that the state of mobile game marketing is just so incredibly toxic and bizarre that that is high quality in terms of what you can get. And certainly, Aaron, you can't say that it hasn't worked when you look at some of the statistics for the game where I guess it's gotten at this point over 100 million plus downloads. In that, that includes, or not includes, but that also has led to them having 10 million daily active users, which is a ridiculous number to have of daily active users. And they've also made off of those users about $2 billion in like, I think they made
10
$1
months.
billion. Oh yeah, sorry, 10 months. Yeah, that's what it is. This game came out
in the first 10 months.
Yeah, this game came out April of 2023 is when this game came out. Just ridiculous. Ultimately, all of these numbers are so grossly high.
Yeah, and to contextualize the 10 million daily active players, just as kind of a reference point, I know it's not a direct one-to-one sort of thing because we're talking about very different games in very different markets, but if you were to go to tracking stuff on Steam right now, the number one game on Steam is sitting at about Counter-Strike 2 at the moment, and that is sitting at about 1 million concurrent players, 1,081,680, with an all-time peak of just shy of 2 million on Steam, and Monopoly Go is more than 5 times that on the daily, just for a frame of reference.
Well, what I will say, and I will make this clarification mostly because I have to deal with CCU, which also is an abbreviation for concurrent users, is that daily users and concurrent users are actually different metrics. So daily users is the amount of people that log into the game throughout the entirety of the day, not that are necessarily on at any given time. Whereas what Steam reports is the number of users playing the game at any given time, not the number of users that play over the course of the day. So
That's fair.
So you're probably right that Counter-Strike has a lower number than Monopoly Go, but I don't actually know what their daily users look like based on just like Steam metrics. But I do think that is a good reference point that illustrates just how big mobile games are, because I think people forget all the time the amount of money and the amount of players that play mobile games, just because I think, and we've talked about this before on an episode, I'm sure, there's this kind of like disconnect between the kind of, I hate the word gamers, but the type of gamers that you and I are, and then the type of gamers that play predominantly mobile games. I think, you know, there's probably people all around us that we don't necessarily think of as being people that play video games, but they play a ton of mobile games. I mean, I can speak for my parents. They play a ton of Wordle, but I certainly don't think of my father as a gamer. Not to belittle him. I think that's actually a good thing. I don't want my father to be a gamer, but
yeah, I mean, we've kind of covered some of those little, like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's almost a addiction issue, just in terms of like how or a taxonomy issue rather. But you know, that sort of distinction aside, obviously the concurrent versus daily being different metrics, but when we're talking about that many millions of players, that is still a pretty bonkers number. And obviously Monopoly Go was designed to appeal to the casual mobile player, as opposed to the diehard strategists among us.
Which we totally are. For
oh
reference.
God, yeah.
Yeah, I'm such a diehard strategist. Actually, in fairness, I have been playing Crusader Kings 3, which is very much a try-hard game, I feel like. So, in fairness, I might sadly be working towards being a try-hard. But one of the things I do think is kind of interesting about this $500 million that was spent is one of the articles that Aaron and I found was from GameSpot, and a lot of this information came out with from an interview with someone that works at Scopley, which is the developer of Monopoly Go. And this head of marketing, basically, I forgot their exact role, but they basically said that a lot of the money was actually spent on localization efforts to really try and build an audience in all of their major like cultural and language regions. So I think that's kind of an interesting point because it sounds like maybe that's part of the reason that this budget was so ridiculously big, is that in their eyes, at least, they focused on, not just taking an ad for the US and then kind of just doing some localization and shooting it over to Germany or shooting it over to England, but perhaps they actually have very unique ads for each of these countries that aren't just, dubs or subs or whatever, right? So I think that's probably part of the reason that it's so expensive, because I'm sure tons of companies would just cut corners and not do that. And at least based on this interview, Scopley certainly thinks that their these hyper localized efforts, or as they call it, a hyper local approach, they think that helped them basically recoup this $500 million spend on marketing in like a few weeks. They basically said they recouped it in a matter of weeks, which is so ridiculous because tons of companies spend months trying to recoup their losses on their development budget alone. And that $500 million doesn't even include their development budget. So it's kind of bonkers. It's how well this went. It's
tremendously bonkers. And I would have to imagine that not just other mobile game studios, but just people with money in general are looking at the return on investment for this game and seeing dollar signs, right? So I'd have to imagine that this approach will not become less common. I feel like that's something we can touch on in a little bit, but I would like to dial in for one quick second on this idea of hyper-localization, or, making, as it says in our notes, the creative marketing material seem relevant to every specific like culture that the game was going to be like marketed to. And at face value, I love the idea of that. I think that if you're trying to appeal to a global audience, understanding that a global audience is made up of local audiences is a really nuanced perspective to take. Now, in practice, I have no idea what drugs were involved in the decision-making process for some of the ads that I, a person who lives in North America, have seen for this game. My favorite ones, which I cannot remember if I have complained about on a previous episode, because we did an entire episode on complaining about certain things like this, mobile ads, I think, in particular. Yeah. There are just, like, the two ads that I always think of, or the set of ads I always think of, are the ones from Monopoly Go with this couple, right? And it is the Grim Spectre of Death and her husband. And she just looks like she looks like she's wearing prosthetics, almost, to make her look 25 years older than her husband. And they both have very, very thick, untraceable Tommy Wiseau-ass accents. And they're constantly putting the emphasis on the wrong word in the sentence, or the wrong syllable, or as I've always said, the emphasis on the wrong syllable. And there's a laugh track behind it, and the jokes aren't jokes. And there's weird snap zooms and dramatic music, and the ads are just uncanny. And I've rewatched them on YouTube in preparation for this episode, and it hurt. But the comments were all like, what is this? This is really uncanny. Was this written by AI? And nothing about those ads, to me, a person who was watching them in either Northwest Ohio or Southern Michigan, none of this reads as like culturally relevant to me, which makes me wonder really what sort of hyper-localized approach they were taking for me, because it ain't these ads. These are low-budget schlock confusion fests. And I guess if that's what they're going for, it worked, because I still remember them, but it didn't make me want to play the game, and it didn't make me feel, understood as a potential audience member. It just looked cheap, manipulative, confusing, and almost like retro internet weird, to the point where they're just like, how weird can we make it to get people to notice it? It just seems like a very weird product to come out of a perspective like, let's appeal to local audiences to cultivate a global consumer base.
Well, I definitely think that we're probably not their target market then, perhaps, is part of the problem, is we're just not the people that they want to entice to play the game. But I would say that, it's probably partially exactly what you just mentioned, which is to say, if they can keep you thinking about the ad, if they can keep you thinking about the game, and then you're on the App Store and you see it, and then you see, oh, it has great reviews, or it has, 5 stars, like, I don't know how many reviews it has right now. I probably actually should have looked that up. But point being, you might be more enticed to actually try the game, even if you thought the ad was super weird and dumb. You might be like, well, I thought the ad was kind of weird, but like all these people seem to like the game, so maybe it's actually good. So I'm sure that's at least part of the process. But
by the way, that would be 2 million reviews.
2 million. Yeah, I mean, that's a crazy amount of reviews. That's ridiculous. And anyway, that's kind of my gut feeling. Before we, move on to talk about why, these budgets might be so ridiculously high, Aaron, I think it would actually probably help to kind of further illustrate how ridiculous this budget seems to people when they first hear it, at least, to just kind of talk about some of the quick headlines that are referenced against Monopoly Go. So
yes,
just as an example, Aaron, and I'll bring this one up because I know that you've talked a lot about this game, but the GameSpot article that we grabbed a lot of information from was titled "Monopoly Go devs spend more on marketing than it costs to develop The Last of Us 2." For context on that, The Last of Us 2 took roughly, I had this number,
$220
million in development cost. That does not include their own marketing budget, but that is a ridiculous amount of money. Another game that was mentioned was Spider-Man 2. That one gets referenced quite frequently, and their budget was even higher, and that was a $300 million development budget. And Scopley, on marketing alone, almost beat both of them with their development budgets combined.
Yeah, which is especially wild when you consider in the current environment of layoffs and people, both pundits and analysts, kind of searching for explanations as to why the industry is in shambles right now. A lot of what ends up coming up in those conversations is the ballooning cost of making AAA games. AAA game budgets are so out of control that they become too big to fail, so even if they succeed moderately, they're deemed failures in the overall sense of returning on the investment, and the development cycles themselves take so long, and there's just, a lot of conversation about the sustainability of games that cost that much to make for an industry struggling to, maintain that sort of thing right now. And a lot of the games that get brought up in those conversations arguably do tend to be some of these marquee Sony titles, because those are some of the biggest single-player cinematic games that come out at any given point during any year where Sony actually has something to release. And that looks like a glass 1/4 full compared to the marketing budget for an ad-heavy mobile game, which is wild to me. The discrepancy between those two things. And the crazier part is apparently it worked, because they quadrupled their investment in 10 months.
Yeah, no, it's crazy for sure. And you're talking about the Sony games, being these high quality games. Some might even say that they are blockbuster titles. And for fun, I saw a Screen Rant article talking about the biggest movie marketing budgets of all time. This was close to when Barbie came out, because Barbie spent quite a bit on their marketing budget. Aaron, for our wonderful audience today, which of these movies and their marketing budget did Scopley beat that was particularly shocking to you, that you think illustrates, the point that we're kind of at least closing out on this section on?
I mean, all of them, but
if you had to choose one, I think I already know the answer, but and
I mean, candidly, if I had to choose one, it would probably be Avatar: The Way of Water. Just because I feel like those movies succeed based on effective marketing and word of mouth more so than the overall quality of the picture. Do you know what I mean? I think those movies need to be marketed heavily, especially Way of Water in particular. I am just rolling out A+ sentences today. No, that movie came out under very interesting circumstances to me. This is a side tangent, but it was many years after, I want to say, Avatar came out in 2009?
Yep.
And The Way of Water came out like 12 years later, whatever it was. And they hadn't really had any success bringing Pandora and Avatar into the cultural zeitgeist in a way that could even remotely compete with like a Star Wars or a Marvel or something like that. Those projects, well, Star Wars not so much anymore, and arguably Marvel not so much anymore, but at the time when we're rolling up towards Avengers Endgame, a movie with a marketing budget $300 million underneath that of Monopoly Go, just for the record, those movies essentially marketed themselves. They still spent a lot of money on marketing because they had to, and you need commemorative lunchboxes and special edition fruit snacks and all that fun stuff, but those movies were always going to have an audience. Avatar did not maintain a huge ravenous fan base from the 2009 original, because that movie came out, it was a huge success, it was the number one highest grossing movie of all time for the longest time, and then people pretty much forgot about it because there really wasn't that much to latch onto in terms of the story or world that was given to us as an audience. They kind of tried with the world of Avatar in Disney, but again, that in a lot of ways almost proved that the franchise isn't nearly as franchisable as they thought. So I would have expected that they would put well over $200 million into trying to market that movie to as wide an audience as possible, because they needed to remind people that Avatar existed and was a thing that they could be excited about. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it is kind of wild that Monopoly Go, more than doubled the marketing budget for Way of Water.
Yeah, and I will say, as a closing note on the Avatar thing, I do think that's what happens to your IP if it takes you 12 years between installations to like come out with a new one, or installments, I guess is the actual word, not installations. How are you going to build a meaningful fan base?
Well, I would argue to some degree that's, I don't know. I mean, Star Wars is kind of immune from that conversation, and I won't go too deep into this because there were obviously games and spin-off projects and, different things. But in some cases, when there's already an established fan base, a little bit of a content drought can actually serve as marketing for whatever project comes out next. It's what I've been saying they need to start doing with Star Wars, is just stop making it for maybe 5 years to let people calm down, so that when the next thing comes out, they actually feel excited instead of exhausted by the prospect of going back into the Star Wars universe. But I think Avatar's greatest sin is that its world is very empty. It's visually stunning, but it is filled with forgettable, archetypal characters. Well, also Star Wars is, but the characters are memorable. So yeah, they were working at a huge disadvantage with that sort of thing. The time gap really did not help them, but it didn't help that, in my opinion, they were starting on shaky ground anyway. they would have been much smarter to roll the hype from the original Avatar into a series of sequels much more quickly than they did. Because I don't know if Avatar 2 was nearly exciting enough for general audiences to warrant, a huge fan outcry for, we need more Avatar. We need more 19-hour movies where very little happens. That kind of thing. But again, I digress.
Well, yeah. I mean, we plenty of thoughts on the wonders of James Cameron.
Jimmy.
But yeah, to the Monopoly Go point, the TLDR of this first 30 minutes that we've spent is they spent a lot of marketing, and it seems to have really paid out for them in the long run. And so what Aaron and I did, we collected some information because it's kind of a well-known secret that a lot of where a game's budget goes is actually to marketing costs. But it's not something that I think is often published very frequently, at least in terms of like firm numbers on how much games are spending on their, development budget versus marketing budget. And so we wanted to provide some clarity there to help explain, why are these marketing budgets, in fact, so ridiculously high? And I think the best note to probably start on, because it's something that we can kind of personally relate to, is video games and entertainment content in general is so incredibly oversaturated that everyone is competing to like get in front of your eyes and stand out. And one of the easiest ways to do that and develop an audience is through marketing on social media, YouTube, which I guess is sort of social media, websites, etc. That is one of the best ways to get in front of people and do what they refer to as user acquisition. That shit is candidly very expensive because there's just so much stuff constantly coming out all the time.
Yeah. I know, I'm not sure, Zach, if you've ever played it, but I think a lot of people are familiar with the little game, Game Dev Simulator, which is
that the Steam one? There's
one on it's on Steam. It's a cute little game. It's very simplistic. It's actually led to some devs calling it almost reductive in a harmful way as a depiction of like the game development cycle. But I think in terms of like a fun little bouncy game that you can spend some time playing here and there, it's harmless. And in this case, it's actually helpful to use to illustrate something because it is so simplistic in that at a certain point in that game, you unlock the ability to start marketing the games that you make. And it does cost money to market, but you will always see a much bigger boom in terms of your initial sales on any title that you ship in that game if you've done some marketing. So, I've found myself in there using that strategy for, especially sequels. Like I'll put much more money into sequels for games that maybe didn't do super well because I know that I'll be able to recoup my losses just based on like the first, couple months of sales. And even if the reviews aren't good, there'll already be, money coming in. And that's just in the simple little tiny world of Game Dev Simulator. So extrapolating that into the actual real world, it stands to reason, right? Like the more people who get a chance to see your stuff, the more likely they are to try and play it. And that number, in my opinion, can really only go up if the product is at face value free to download.
Yeah. And I think this is part of what you're discussing, I think is really hit at in this the hidden costs of indie game development, this GameIndustry.biz article, in that they're talking to indie game developers and talking about some of the hidden costs and some of the things that people don't think of and might forget to do. And one of the things that they really hit on is that a lot of indie game devs often forget about marketing, or they may not think about marketing or business development as part of the game dev process. And this article is trying to illustrate that if you think in that way, you're really putting yourself on a bad foot moving forward, because in order to be successful with your game before it launches, you need to have an audience like generated and made to support your game. And one of the best ways to make an audience is to market and get in front of people so that they understand what your game is. They understand if they will like your game, if they're interested in your game, and all of these things. And also they'll help promote it to other people. And so it's a big mistake to not put time or money or effort into marketing, because it helps you, stand out in this oversaturated market. And to your point, Aaron, that you just said, having a pre-established audience is going to make it easier for you to recoup your losses and decrease the amount of time that you're in the red. And when I say in the red, I just mean, the amount of time where you've spent more money than you've gained back from selling your product or people buying things with in-app purchases, whatever it might be, right? So you want to be in that period as little as possible. You want to be making money, not recouping your losses. So that's another reason why a lot of these budgets are so ridiculously high. And just since I'm talking about audiences, I'll also just mention that, and I know, Aaron, we've talked about it when it comes to this show and how do we attract new people and da-da-da-da-da. But generally speaking, marketing gets more expensive the more people you try to bring in. And then you're going to be like, well, Zach, duh, you're trying to bring in more people. And it's like, well, it's not like a one-to-one correlation, because your core audience is going to be the cheapest group to acquire when it comes to user acquisition. If you try to pull people in that may not be part of your core group, it's going to get more expensive because you're just going to have to spend more to get in front of them, to entice them, to try and pull them into your core audience. It's more expensive than getting someone that's already committed, that's already there for your game. So where I'm going with this is marketing can kind of exponentially get more expensive the more people you try to bring in. The more saturated you get with your core audience, the more expensive it's going to get as you try to pull people in that may not be part of that.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously that's true of just about everything that can be marketed, right? Not just video games, not just movies and such, but that does track. And it seems like they were going for as broad an audience with this as they possibly could get. Because, I mean, Monopoly itself is not the most complicated board game you can play, but this is obviously a streamlined experience designed to be played over a very long period of time, but engaged with in very small chunks of time, separated by, probably, hours and whatnot, of inaction. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, it makes sense that they would try to reach as broad an audience as possible, and it makes sense that they probably factored all of those, exponential costs and whatnot probably into the front end of their marketing, because I don't know that they've had like a steady ramp up in the intervening months where they've really been pumping it out to try and build it. So I feel like it's kind of just maintained, if anything.
I was at a game dev meetup last month, and I was talking with someone that was a mobile game studio head, and he was telling me that apparently this isn't from an article, so at this point we're just talking about hearsay. But he was telling me that apparently part of the methodology for Monopoly was to spend such an obscene amount of money at the start that you basically don't have to spend very much on marketing after that. To further elaborate, he was saying if you spend enough money, you'll basically get to the front page of the Google Play and the Apple App Store. If enough people start playing your game, that it becomes viral and it starts generating a ton of money, it starts generating a ton of downloads, whatever, right? You will get to the top trending section for mobile games on Google and on Apple. And then you don't have to spend money again because you're already locked in, because people already know what they're looking for. So hypothetically, if you weren't there, people could still look up Monopoly Go and they'll still find it. But what's more important is to be on that front page, and they basically solidify themselves being on that front page because they spend so much money, they get so many downloads, in interactions, reviews. And so they're just there. They're just in the top, trending mobile games, and they're not going to get dislodged because they spent so much money up front, and then they can decrease heavily their marketing budget after, they kind of lock themselves in. So that's what he was saying, is it's basically like playing SEO to get to the front page on Google. So you always pop up, and once you're on that front page, people will find you, and the game air quotes, right? Not Monopoly Go, the hypothetical game, kind of plays itself.
Yeah, I mean, basically, that's a much more succinct way of saying what I was kind of trying to allude to there. But it's it's one of those things where there are just certain games you have come to expect will be. Candy Crush is a great example of that, where there was the big boom in Candy Crush popularity, and now it's just like, oh, I could always go to the Play Store and download Candy. You just already know the name.
Yeah.
It's just in there. So, I mean, I guess kudos to them for coming up with an effective strategy. I just wish the ads were better.
Yeah, I mean, like, the thing about mobile game studios is the big ones are so scary, Aaron, because they've just got so much data. They've got so much analytics. Like, I know that people kind of crap on some big AAA game studios for making like really data-driven decisions that don't seem to prioritize their core player base. But mobile game studios are like these crazy, like, well-oiled machines of data and like I know data and analytics are the same thing, but algorithms and like it's crazy. Mobile games are crazy. People think mobile games, I think just because you look at a mobile game and you're like, oh, this isn't the sexiest thing to look at. I think sometimes people think they're kind of cheap, but like the operation behind the scenes is fucking crazy. I think that's kind of partially illustrated by the fact that, like, there was that game developer article I pulled some data on, and it was talking about how, as a rule of thumb, AAA games, they'll typically spend about 75 to 100% of their equivalent of their dev budget on marketing. So in the case of, The Last of Us Part 2, it's very possible they spent another $220 million on marketing the game. That being said, for mobile games, the article says it's not uncommon for them to spend 3x to 7x the development cost on marketing. And I don't know what your thoughts are, kind of hearing that difference, but that is quite a bit of a different multiplier when you're going from like blockbuster AAA games spending 1x their dev budget to like, maybe not a blockbuster mobile game, just a normal mobile game spending 3x what it was to develop. And obviously there, it could be more to develop a AAA game than a mobile game. That's a fair point, but still, looking at where the money's going is kind of crazy.
Yeah, I was going to say, to me, the scale argument there makes sense, because I wouldn't bother anybody by trying to guess off the top of my head what the average dev spend is for a mobile game, because I'd actually have to imagine that average is highly skewed by the extremes. Just because there are some mobile games that obviously cost very little to make, and then there are some that are obviously much more involved processes that the actual development costs are a lot more, they're a lot more close to, a AA budget for a console game or something like that. But I don't know. At the same time, I think some of the AAA games can get away without spending $500 million because they kind of have marquee status on the machine that they're tied to, or at least in this console generation. We'll see what that looks like in the future. But, like, The Last of Us Part 3 comes out. Again, built-in audience. It's going to have a humongous out-the-door cost just to get the game made. So spending $600 million on marketing for that would, I feel like, almost be a misallocation of funds, considering there is also a much firmer cap on the number of people who can actually engage with that title, because it is locked to pieces of expensive hardware, right? Whereas Monopoly Go can run on anyone's phone. So it does kind of jive to me that the spend on acquisition would make sense, partially because, again, everyone has the machine that can play the game, so you were looking at a much wider audience, but because everyone already has the machine that can play the game, they already have a bunch of games on the machine. And so we're still talking about, trying to break through the noise, which, hey, our good friend Money can help with that. So, I mean, the breakdown kind of makes sense to me. It is still kind of wild to look at it in a vacuum and just be like, holy shit, 7 times the development cost on marketing. But I guess it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I think that just based on the fact that there's hyper casual games, which are the ones that are basically, to make it really vulgar, a pump and dump. You make the game, it costs virtually nothing, you put a bunch of ads on it, and then players play the game for like maybe 20 minutes, you get hit with a bunch of ads, and that ad revenue, is basically how they make the game. But the game's so low cost that they're still making money. Like, those games are getting made all the time, they're constantly getting developed. The studios doing that are making like, tens of them every year, right? So I think it's a situation where I'd assume there's just way more competition in the mobile space, so you have to pay more to get noticed than there is competition in the AAA space or the PC game space. I definitely think this is definitely a thought. I don't have any data behind this to prove it, but to your point about The Last of Us, and I would extrapolate that out to things like Halo hasn't been doing great lately, but like Halo, Gears of War, Final Fantasy, any of these games where their name kind of carries a weight, there does seem to be a feeling that when you're in the mainline installments of them, you don't need to do as much marketing, at least in the sense of like making new advertisements or ad reels or demo content or whatever. Because I feel like typically you just have your announcement trailer, and then, maybe you'll have a gameplay trailer kind of closer to release, and then you'll have a release trailer. But I feel like for a lot of big AAA games, especially once they're well established, you're not getting a ridiculously high volume of advertisements for them that are different, at least. I feel like that's not to say that's always the case, but it does really seem like if people are excited about your game, like for example, Monster Hunter World, there have been 2 trailers for Monster Hunter World that have come out. The game comes out next year. I suspect during the next cycle of big customer-facing conferences next year, we'll probably get some more trailers. But if it follows what we've already seen, I mean, actually, they do like to do monster reveal trailers, so maybe there'll be a little bit more. My point mostly being is, like, if people already kind of know about your IP and they know a new game's coming out, I feel like all you really need to do is remind the audience when the game's coming out, and you'll do okay.
Yeah, I would say, the trifecta there is you've got your initial reveals, usually a cinematic, and then you've got some robust gameplay, and then you've got maybe an accolades trailer that comes out after the game comes out if you're trying to fuel sales later on, or you'll have your little like pre-release trailer, come get the game, it's available now or available for pre-order still for another 2 days. I think a lot of those games kind of market themselves, and I think to some degree the market, the sub-market for people who want to check the game out before buying it is basically taken care of gratis by the Let's Play community, where if someone's unsure about a game that they already know exists because of the one big trailer that got signal boosted by every website on the planet, then they'll watch somebody who maybe got the game for free, maybe didn't, and is playing it on their channel to, provide content to their viewers. That's something that Sony or Microsoft or, X company, Y company doesn't necessarily have to fork over the money for. So yeah, I whereas, I don't, granted I might just be this out of the loop, but I really would doubt that there is a huge ravenous market for people watching, soon to be disgraced streamers play Monopoly Go on Twitch for hours a day. I would be really surprised if that was the new hotness on the internet.
Well, yeah. I mean, I will say, like, with marketing, it's kind of hard to clarify some of these points because it encompasses so much. Because to your point, companies do pay influencers to play their games or
Yes,
talk about
absolutely.
their games. Not everything is an obvious ad in the way that, like, we think about it. Publications will do. They'll give opinion pieces on a game. Some of those are paid. Technically they have to disclose that, I'm pretty sure. But, it's not always super obvious when you're being advertised to, just because I'm sure companies pay GameIndustry.biz to talk about their game. Obviously they pay IGN to talk about their game, and they're not always like inherently positive think pieces on the game. Sometimes it's just to get the word out about the game. And admittedly, I feel like I'm not as like clued in on how often that happens, because most of the way that I get advertised to is through trailers, but that's certainly not the only way that companies spend money on marketing. So yeah, I'm just kind of thinking, well, I guess, yeah, if you've got a AAA game and you want it to do better than the previous one, kind of by definition, you need to grow the audience. So it would still make sense that you'd probably spend a decent amount of money on marketing, even for sequels, because, line must go up. So, yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting to see some of these numbers, and they all illustrate that, at least these big companies are spending millions and millions of dollars to get in front of your eyeballs. So I guess my takeaway on this subject is each one of you listening to the show, you're special. People are spending millions of dollars to get in front of your eyeballs right now. So when someone tells you that you're not special, they're lying, because Sony cares about selling to you.
That specifically, yes.
Yeah, I guess I have no hate. It was all these games have been Sony games, so they're in my head.
Yeah, they're all faceless corporations that care more about line go up than anything. So throw the shade at Sony, throw it at fucking Hasbro, wherever the shade is to be thrown, someone probably deserves to catch it. But yeah, I mean, I guess my joke takeaway is that since Hasbro is directly involved with Monopoly Go, it's possible that whatever Baldur's Gate 4 looks like, they'll at least have some extra budget to work with.
Maybe.
Depending on how those funds are allocated.
Well, the problem is Larian is not under Hasbro. They just were using the IP.
Oh, yeah, no, that's what I mean. But, like, Hasbro is defo going to make a Baldur's Gate 4. It's just not going to be made by Larian.
I really hope, that Baldur's Gate 4 is just more gay than the first one was, just more thirst trappy, more horny for no particular reason. Like, maybe that's the lesson Hasbro will take from everything is gay and horny sells.
Gay and horny do sell.
You
could probably find some really horny ex-BioWare devs who are looking for an outlet.
I feel like I might know some very horny ex-BioWare devs. But it's not me. I have never worked at BioWare, so that isn't a self-plug.
Pardon the horny pun.
The horny pun aside, I know, Aaron, you wanted to mention a quick tidbit of news before we closed out the episode and did our thank yous for today. So I'll pass it over to you to share your rage with
thank
the
you
community.
So on the flip side of this kind of evergreen topic that we've spent nearly an hour with you kind of pontificating about, I'm going to go with a straight from the headlines, almost call to action. And that is, seriously consider changing your purchasing habits to cut GameStop out of them entirely, if you haven't already done that. Because just within the last couple of days, GameStop closed Game Informer. The long-running, longer than 30 years, I think? What, 30-some-odd years?
33.
Yeah, publication that was, looped in with your GameStop Power Up Pro membership or whatever. And they have incredibly good, for the most part, journalism that's been going on for 3 decades. And these beautiful artistic covers that basically make the magazines into collector's items. I know I have stacks of them from all the years that I'd subscribed to Game Informer. And GameStop just said, nope, done. It's closed. They pulled all of the staffers into a meeting, basically midday through a workday, and said, that current issue you're working on, stop. You're no longer employed here. You'll go into another room and start talking about severance in a sec. But bye-bye, Game Informer is now closed. That would suck by itself, but GameStop then took the, if not unprecedented, then certainly uncommon move of deleting the website from the internet, which means that not only can you, the reader, not go back and access any of the good work done up to this point by the people writing for Game Informer, the people who wrote for Game Informer can no longer claim any of those articles as portfolio pieces if they did not have them independently saved, and they certainly can't claim them anymore as published portfolio pieces because they're no longer published. That's pretty shitty. And then the icing on the cake is that if you go to Game Informer's website at the moment, it automatically redirects you to the only page on the website, which is a 2-paragraph and 1-sentence farewell letter that absolutely nobody at the company as of the time of recording has owned up to writing, leading both former employees and online journalists to speculate that the article, the farewell letter, may actually have been written by AI. We asked ChatGPT if it was, and the results were inconclusive. But all of that kind of boils down to a staggering lack of respect for dedicated employees and good journalists. It smacks of a lack of care for consumers and the general desperation of the GameStop organization and what they're willing to do to save a couple of bucks here and there. And I think that, a publication closure is one thing, robbing employees of their portfolio pieces is another, and then potentially making the epitaph to their work written by a soulless computer is just the icing on the cake. And I think that it all kind of boils down to something that's morally reprehensible. And at least for my part, I have decided that I am just no longer going to patronize GameStop. I am all for purchasing physical games whenever humanly possible, even if they are just glorified, access keys and whatnot. That doesn't matter. I still try and go for physical games whenever I can. I just won't be purchasing them from GameStop anymore. And that sucks, but it's something that I would invite you to consider as well, just based on your own sort of moral compass. But yeah, I just needed to vent that rage out into the ether, and I figured, hey, I got a microphone and a platform, so why the fuck not?
For those that don't know, I did ask ChatGPT if it was in fact an AI-written article, and ChatGPT said it didn't think it was, so I think Aaron's lying. So
that's fair.
I was kidding. No, my actual real comment before kind of closing is I just wonder how much it actually costs to run like a corporate website. Surely there might be
how much
some
does the web
fees.
hosting cost?
Yeah, especially if you're still getting advertising money, it's an interesting move. I just don't know how much of like an expense that really is. Like, is the expense worth doing the damage? I don't know. There's like tons of dead websites too. I'm pretty sure when we did our when we did our episode on games journalism, kind of not dying, well, sort of dying out in some ways, but ultimately all the mergers and whatnot. There are a few websites that got mentioned that don't get posted to anymore, and those are still around. And those got shut down like 8 years ago, some of them. So anyway, fucking bizarre. Weird choice, GameStop. But then again, everything you've done recently as you've been in your death saving throes has been a weird decision. So, whatever, I guess.
So, well, when GameStop finally kicks the bucket if it makes it to the next console generation, that'll be the final blow. But, it may very well come the next 18 months that GameStop is just closing the fuck up. And I'll tell you this much, I will be less sad to hear it now than I was 3 days ago. So take that for what you will. But you know what I will never be sad about?
No, tell me, Aaron.
Our beautiful partnership with the wonderful musical artist Beach Girl.
Oh my gosh, I've heard that partnership is wonderful and beautiful.
It certainly is. It yielded our phenomenal intro and outro music, as well as a fine selection of tunes that you can access just about anywhere on the internet. SoundCloud, Bandcamp, Spotify, YouTube, others. All of these fine places for music is where you can find this fine music. So yeah, do actually, jests aside, check out Beach Girl on your preferred, platform, and show them some love, share them around, and yeah, just circulate the tapes.
Do you know what I love to look at while I listen to Beach Girl, preferably on a beach?
Horny gay video games.
Yes, but also Dougie Art, who doesn't
make
horny, well... Ignore me. Anyway, Dougie Art. Dougie Art is a safe for work artist that we are friends with, who made our wonderful logo and all that jazz. So please make sure to show her some love, show her some support as I'm flustered. You can find Dougie Art on Instagram and on Etsy. So please show her some love. It is appreciated. Thank you, Dougie Art, and thank you, Beach Girl, for your support on this project. And with that, thank you, our dear listener, for tuning in this week and listening to us yet again bloviate on a topic about the games industry.
Yes, indeed. Thank you once again for indulging us, and I suppose for the last 10 minutes, particularly me. But yeah. We will we'll catch you on the flip side. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Oh, Jimmy.
But, oh, Jimmy.